Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the 10th webinar in the Insights Outreach Series hosted by DHS Science and Technology, Office of Industry Partnerships. I am Dee Parker, S&T's Industry Liaison. In this series, we want to help you navigate S&T's partnership opportunities, understand DHS mission needs, and identify paths to funding to help get the best Homeland Security solutions to market faster. This is the second to last webinar of 2021, so keep an eye out for information on OIP's last webinar to take place on December the 7th. You can find a list of our upcoming webinars and recordings of our previous videos on the DHS S&T events page. During today's webinar, you will learn about the unique challenges that climate change possesses to our nation and how DHS is working to increase the nation's resilience to the climate crisis in innovative ways, such as our recent Cooling Solutions Challenge. Now, please note that if you have any questions or comments, be sure to put them in the Q&A chat box, and we will address them later in the webinar. With that, I will introduce Dr. David Alexander, Senior Science Advisor for Resilience. Dr. Alexander leads S&T's Enduring Sciences branch within the Technology Centers Division and serves as the S&T lead for climate change. David, nice to meet you. Over to you.
Thank you, Dee. And again, welcome everyone. So we have a fabulous panel lined up for today's Innovation Insights webinar, Meeting the Challenges of Climate Change. Collectively, we are hearing many conversations on how emerging technologies and innovation solutions can help us address big challenges facing our world. In this case, climate change. Our talk today will be a conversation with leaders from across DHS on strategic goals and objectives for addressing the climate crisis and potential opportunities for science and innovation. The panel will include a series of speaker dialogues followed by a moderated question and answer session. Let me introduce our panelists. From FEMA, we have Art Von Lee, who spent 2021 on detail building FEMA's Climate Adaptation Secretariat, coordinating agency-wide climate change strategy and policy. And when not on detail, Art serves as FEMA's Resilience Branch Chief in the Office of Environmental Planning and Historic Preservation. Art, welcome. And we also have Mike Lee, Chief of the Office of Strategy and Innovation. In Mike's office, he manages FEMA's strategic planning and priorities for the Individual Assistance Division and strives to innovate programs that benefit the disaster survivor through research, customer experience, and human-centered design. And from our Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency, we have Sue Armstrong, who is the Associate Director for Strategy, Performance, and Resources of the Infrastructure Security Division of CISA. And in this capacity, Sue works across the infrastructure community to identify trends and secure support for programs that bolster the security and resilience of the nation's infrastructure. And joined with her is Steve Kaufman, the Chief of the Resilient Services Branch in CISA's Infrastructure Security Division. Steve leads programs to develop and deploy capabilities to assess the security and resilience of infrastructure assets and systems, and to incorporate resilience enhancements in local and regional scales. And then from S&T, we are joined by Ron Langhelm, Program Manager for the Community and Infrastructure Resilience Program. In this capacity, Ron leads R&D projects to address DHS component requirements and gaps related to natural disasters and climate change. And we also have Kathleen Kenyon, DHS Prize Competition Program Manager, who is also supporting the new series of DHS Prize competitions addressing climate change. So let's say welcome to all our panelists. Great, so let's get started with the dialogue. Framing the problem from the strategic view of Homeland Security. Recently, DHS released its strategic framework and action plan for addressing climate change to lead resilience and adaptation to changes in the climate risk landscape, resulting from strategic competition, global risks such as climate change, demographic trends, aging infrastructure, and emerging technology. The DHS framework will guide DHS's implementation of President Biden's executive order on addressing the impacts of climate change at home and abroad through foresight, unity of effort, and innovation along 5 lines of effort: empowering individuals and communities to develop climate resilience, building readiness to respond to increases in climate-driven emergencies, incorporating climate science into strategy, policy, programs, and budgets, investing in a sustainable and resilient DHS, and ensuring the DHS workforce is informed on climate change. The need to address equity will be a guiding principle throughout each line of effort described in the strategic framework and is underpinned by concepts of cooperation and leadership across DHS stakeholders and building and sustaining a culture that rewards the implementation of forward-leaning technology, policy, and planning for the Department of Homeland Security and the nation. So as you can see, science and innovation plays a prominent role in the DHS Climate Resilience Framework and supporting priority actions laid out by the department, which can be summarized as follows: incorporate climate adaptation planning and processes into Homeland Security missions, ensure climate resilient facilities and infrastructure, incorporate climate adaptation into regional preparedness and community grants and projects, ensure climate ready services and supplies, and increase climate resilience. Now, to hear more from our DHS components, let me turn it over to Art Von Lee from FEMA to get us started. Art, over to you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Alexander, and thank you to DHS for this important engagement. So I will say, first off, Dr. Alexander gave a great overview of the strategic vision under which FEMA is working as a component of the department. Some of the pieces that really stood out from a strategic focus perspective included climate literacy, the need for climate data, and the need to build climate resilience through our investments. These are some key levels of effort and opportunities for FEMA. Literacy is foundational. So as we look across the emergency management enterprise, and as we look at all of the different stakeholders that FEMA works with, emergency managers and the whole community, we think about literacy. How do the individuals and organizations working to build climate resilience understand the threats, assess those hazards and risks, and then leverage the right data to be able to address them? So again, data, as I said a second ago, is very important. And this, of course, has a technological aspect for collecting and analyzing data. And so climate data really is the bedrock. If we're going to do something different, we need to know what to do differently and what risks to build resilience against and how those risks are changing. So data is critically important. And then finally, climate resilient investments. And these investments and the way that we invest are very important. Are we leveraging that data? Are we leveraging that information as the basis of planning, activities, and project design? Are we designing those investments differently? So that requires an understanding of the data, the literacy to be able to use it, and then to be able to actually incorporate it into planning and investment. So FEMA has a great deal of programs, and I'll talk about a handful of them. First, I'll talk about two of our competitive grant programs. The first is our competitive Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities program, or BRIC. And BRIC provides funding to help strengthen America's infrastructure and communities through risk reduction measures. So through BRIC, FEMA is incentivizing actions to reduce risk from climate change and other changing conditions by awarding specific points for project applications that include the use of future conditions information and climate data as the basis of the design of those projects. BRIC also incentivizes nature-based or green infrastructure strategies, which help communities adapt to climate change by building with nature, using materials like soil and plants instead of steel and concrete. And BRIC can also be used to support hazard mitigation planning. This year, FEMA was excited to announce more funding than ever, with a total of $1 billion for the BRIC program. Second competitive program of FEMA's I'll highlight is the Flood Mitigation Assistance Program, which received $160 million in funding for fiscal year 2021. This program is designed to reduce or eliminate the risks of repetitive flood damages to homes and buildings insured by the National Flood Insurance Program. And then, of course, we have our non-competitive grant programs, which are critically important in light of the need to build climate resilience. So two of those programs become available to communities that receive a presidential disaster declaration. Those programs are the Public Assistance Program and the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program. So both of these programs, to the extent that hazard mitigation measures are being used, can be leveraged to build climate resilience by using that climate data that I just talked about, which is critically important. And finally, I'll note that FEMA is working hard right now on key climate-related action by implementing the Federal Flood Risk Management Standard, or flood standard. And that's required under executive order, and it will improve the resilience of American communities and federal assets against the impacts of flood damage by requiring a higher standard associated with all federal investments. So with all of this, one of the biggest points I want to make to everyone is that communities can leverage FEMA's grant programs to build climate resilience today by using the best available climate science data to inform their planning, activities, and projects. Thank you.
So Mike, I'll turn it over to you if you want to offer some additional perspectives from FEMA.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Art. So as many of you know, obviously FEMA has a huge role in climate resilience, but we are also the agency responsible for coordinating the federal disaster response. And so firsthand, we see year after year just how natural hazards have a devastating effect on our country. Whether it's flooding across the Midwest or the flood surge along the coast or even historic wildfires out west, there's little denying that disasters are on the rise and how they affect our country are increasingly impactful. So in recovery, we've began providing mitigation measures to individuals and families to strengthen the roofs of their homes so they can withstand greater winds and storms. And we've even begun elevating critical home utilities such as water heaters and furnaces to avoid the damage of future flooding. So we do all these things along with many of the other recovery resources because we recognize that, after a disaster, survivors are often left with a number of dire conditions. And many of the problems that they have pre-disaster are intensified once the disaster has gone. So climate resilience and the ability for our country to adapt to these changes grow to be more critical every day. So conditions such as severe heat not only affect the lives of the most vulnerable, but it also becomes a devastating problem for all of our disaster survivors. And we've seen this in almost every case. So this is why we really look forward to the innovative solutions and the answers that we need to really help push this needle forward and strengthen our climate resilience. Thank you again for joining us. David, back to you.
Great. Thank you, Art and Mike. Now let me hand it over to Sue Armstrong from CISA and learn a little bit more about their perspectives on climate change. Sue?
Is that working?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Hold on. Sorry. I'm trying to start my video and it doesn't seem to want to. But anyway, my purpose here today is to really introduce Steve Kaufman, who is our chief for the Resilient Services branch. And you might ask, why would the Infrastructure Security Division be involved in climate change? Well, some of the things we've learned over the years, and many of you, I hope, have not been involved in these things, but you know, we started as in statute as a counterterrorism organization, as the infrastructure protection, you know, looking for that next big, well-financed, coming from overseas attack on the United States. But what we have learned really since the 2005 timeframe is we need to build resilience into our built environment in the United States. You know, we've had Katrina, Wilma, Rita, Harvey, Superstorm Sandy that have damaged infrastructure. And by that, I do not just mean homes. God bless those people that have lost things, but you know, think of a railroad bridge that has cable and fiber running under it that gets taken out by a storm. And that could affect a power plant, a military base, etc. So this is what we're trying to prevent. And so we are looking for, and I think Congress set us up as the CISA to be agile and help the nation adapt to climate change and other things that we are going through as a nation. So climate, underserved populations, and we're looking for you to help us with solutions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve, and he is going to talk to you. And I'm so sorry I couldn't get my video to start at this point, but he is going to talk to you about some of the awesome things that are going on in infrastructure resilience. But I also do want to point you all to the fact that it is Infrastructure Security Month, and the president put out a proclamation today on exactly that fact. Also, I would like you to bend your thinking around the infrastructure bill that seems to have passed. We're waiting for kind of the details on that. But our mission in CISA is to partner with owners and operators of critical infrastructure, the SLTT community, the academic community, and industry. So please, you know, as you go through this, think about us and think about proposals for helping us achieve this mission. So Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Sue. And good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to speak with you this afternoon. As David mentioned in the introduction, I currently lead the Resilient Services branch at CISA. And what we do is develop the tools, the methodologies, and the guidance that is generally implemented by our protective security advisors in the field and our regional office personnel working with their stakeholders in the states and local governments. And those tools and methodologies that we produce are designed to look at the security and resilience of individual infrastructure assets. So capabilities such as our security assessment first entry or SAFE and the infrastructure survey tool are designed to look at individual assets. Relative to climate in particular and other threats that have a broader impact, we have the Regional Resilience Assessment Methodology, or RRAP methodology, that we've been applying for the last 12 years or so to really look at infrastructure at a regional scale and understanding the dependencies and interdependencies that exist among infrastructure systems and on the organizations that depend on infrastructure, and what the cascading consequences of failure might be. We've applied that methodology to over 100 different projects across all 10 of the CISA regions. And some of those projects have actually addressed the threat to infrastructure that climate change poses. We've done a number of those over the years. We have 2 new starts in FY21 that specifically address climate impacts to infrastructure. But as you might imagine, with a relatively limited staff, we have just over 100 protective security advisors around the country, in the 10 regional offices and their staff. Our ability to apply those capabilities is somewhat limited. And so what we've tried to do over the last year or so is begin taking that collective knowledge of the last 12 years and put that into guidance documents that we can promulgate publicly. One of those is the Regional Resilience Assessment Methodology that I've posted a link in the chat so you can grab that. But that documents the methods that we use when conducting a regional resilience assessment, from bringing together the relevant stakeholders and the project champion who are essential to a successful project, to how we actually analyze infrastructure dependencies and the cascading consequences of failure, and then leading to recommendations for infrastructure enhancements to address those gaps and build resilience. The other resource that we've recently published is the Infrastructure Resilience Planning Framework, or IRPF. And the IRPF is really intended to bring an infrastructure or a systems-based lens or resilience-based lens to infrastructure planning. So understanding, again, those dependency and interdependency relationships, but really thinking about using that as a way to understand and prioritize actions that could enhance resilience and that can be implemented through existing planning processes. So things like the hazard mitigation plan or comprehensive development planning, or even comprehensive economic development strategies that are required by the Economic Development Administration. And so we've tried to bring that broader perspective to the resilience planning process for infrastructure. I think the other important thing to recognize is that, probably over the last 15 or so years, we've focused on really the physical elements of our infrastructure. But I think what has begun to emerge over the last decade or so is a real understanding that infrastructure underpins our society and our economy. And so we've tried to take a perspective that looks at the interaction of society and particularly the economy, things like how tax base or revenues that are paid for infrastructure services such as water, wastewater, communications, and so on, impact the ability of maintaining those systems so that they operate as intended when they're stressed by hazard events, and gradually using that to build resilience over time. And so we're continuing to work in this area, recognizing that climate resilience is a significant threat to our infrastructure. And we're trying now to begin developing the capacity within our state, local, tribal, and territorial partners to do some of this work on their own using resources that we've developed. With that, I will turn it back over to David. Thank you.
Great, Steve. And Sue, that was excellent. So next up is Ron Langhelm, who will provide us some more insight on research and innovation for climate change from DHS S&T. Ron? Hi, Ron. We've lost your audio, Ron.
All right, is that better?
There you go.
All right. So many of the issues and outcomes needed to address climate change are complex, they're very interconnected, rely on very large volumes of data. The efforts that we have within S&T really are striving to drive innovation. We're looking to optimize technologies and grow our workforce through the initial thrust areas and topics that are listed here. Up front is the disaster resilience for the future, and that's focused at utilities, public infrastructure, and we've heard a lot about that already on the infrastructure side. But we're really working to apply research and development, building off of guidelines, concepts, standards, and methods to support the future of utilities and the public infrastructure for disaster resilience and functional recovery, one of the key aspects of resiliency. Within this, we're looking at areas such as like new observations, diagnostics, monitoring and alerting capabilities, and operational experimentations required to adapt, transition, and climate science research performed by other agencies for operational use. So being able to capitalize on some of the work that other folks are doing and being able to better implement it across our community. Second is the strengthening community resilience through the social and environmental equities. So this is research looking at identifying and enhancing the scientifically sound sources of data on social equity to better support the Homeland Security, climate adaptation and disaster resilience efforts across federal, state, and local stakeholders. And we're going to inform both the implementation of action plans and enhance the disaster resilience outcomes across these communities. Looking at the advanced material science and artificial intelligence teaming for critical infrastructure resilience. This topic area is really working on the R&D for new areas of self-healing and regenerative materials that essentially are making our critical infrastructure more resilient to various shocks and stresses from climate change. So looking at the physical aspects of some of these resources and structures that are in place providing protection already. Looking at the future of insurance and financial preparedness specific to climate risk management. This is supporting research into new insurance and economic sharing solutions, helping identify critical data and capability gaps and insights to conduct policy incubation experiments and increase climate resilience. From there, we're looking at the enabling of new sensors for climate adaptation optimization, specifically looking to onboard analytical solutions for automated alerting. Examples of this include surface and air detection, physical security sensor enhancements, infrastructure and integrity monitoring, critical asset threat detection and screening improvements, earth observations for monitoring compliance, or exploring the carbon markets and offset credits and better matching decision-making to optimal solutions. So the optimal solution side is, the incorporation of technology, interventions, protective measures, et cetera, and doing this through integrated and foresight planning. Last step is looking at the technologies for reducing the impacts of climate change. And this is really an adaptation and extension of work that we've been doing on FEMA's behalf for quite some time. In this area, we're looking to leverage tools such as the prize challenges and other civic innovation approaches to tap into innovators and inventors, hoping to deliver novel solutions and impacts for climate change. So really tapping into to the community at large and looking for novel ideas, novel solutions, and a community we really haven't touched a lot with over kind of the past the recent past. And finally, we're looking to get into the Leading the Cooling Solution Challenge, which is one of the new aspects and projects we have going on. You'll hear more about that from Kathleen, along with some of the other technologies that might reduce the DHS mission reliance on carbon-based energies and the provision of eco-friendly alternatives across the department. So from there, I can just pass on to Kathleen, and she'll share some of the latest on the S&T prize challenges and other innovative tools.
Thank you, Ron. I have the pleasure to talk about prize challenges. Prize challenges are something that's unique and fun. We actually have a lot of prizes we've done over the last few years. And the latest one is on DHS Cooling Solutions. It's our Cooling Solutions Prize. It is new. We just announced it in September. It has almost $200,000 that are up for grabs. And we are looking for really interesting, unique, groundbreaking cooling solutions that can counter extreme heat. Many of us have witnessed over the last couple of years extreme temperatures, and that is one of the leading causes of deaths in the United States relevant to weather. And this is a challenge to find unique solutions, novel solutions that are climate change neutral, that can help us face this together in 4 different areas. The first one is helping first responders when they're out in extreme conditions, helping them with cooling solutions. The second is at home, for those that may not have conventional air conditioning or HVAC systems, that we can look for solutions to help them when they're faced with heating and rising temperatures. The third is cooling solutions for the person, the individual, just to help them maintain their temperatures. And the last one is looking at disadvantaged, so those that may not have necessarily a structure to go to, and those are cooling solutions for the general public who are outside, things like cooling solutions for the metro or for stadiums or just for being on the streets in general. So those are the 4 categories of this prize. The prize itself is in 2 parts. The first part is to submit your idea or your solution, and that we're awarding up to $5,000 for 15 ideas or solutions. If we like your idea and you move to the next stage of the prize, the top winning is $50,000 for first place. It's $20,000 for second prize, and then there are 4 individual $10,000 prizes for those 4 categories I mentioned: the first responders, the home, the individual. Those are $10,000 each. It's really easy to enter the prize, and here are some key dates for you. The first thing is the prize was announced in September. We're looking for solutions to be entered by December 7th. And then we plan to announce the finalists in January. And then the winners of the stage 2 of the prize will be in March. It's just really simple to enter the prize and enter your entry. The way you do that is you can go to our DHS prize competition page. On there, you're going to find all the rules and conditions you need to comply with, along with how you submit. It's simply an email to us with your name and your basic information, the solution that you're proposing, and how it addresses the problem that we highlighted. And then you can do either a 3-page paper, keep it nice and simple, or if you want, even easier is a video explaining your solution and how that solution would work and address the issues. You're going to see some criteria for both stage 1 and stage 2 of the prize. And stage 2 of the prize is more things like, is it eco-friendly? Is it easy to use? Is it cost-effective? So make sure you address that criteria in your submission. And then we'll be in contact with you when we receive your submission, so you know that we have it. And then the judges will judge your submissions and announce the finalists in January and the winners in March. If you have any questions about the prize and how it's being run, always email the prize competition email, which is on our website. You also can visit challenge.gov, and challenge.gov is where all of our government prizes are announced and maintained, and look at the prize there as well. So thank you so much on the prize competition. I'll turn it back over to David to talk about the moderated panel discussion. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you, Kathleen. So I think we've provided some pretty good background and context. So this is the exciting part of the webinar. We're going to get into some interactive question and answer. Just a reminder for those attending the live session, you are welcome to post questions in the Zoom Q&A feature for consideration. If we don't get to your question today, we will provide and attempt to provide follow-up answers to any other questions that were submitted. So let's get started. Art, first question. How do you see technology and innovation supporting FEMA climate change priorities?
Oh, thank you. That's critically important. So I'll start broadly by saying we have built in to our communities in the built environment itself a lot of risk. And that risk is increasing as we're seeing with natural disasters going up and the cost of disasters drastically increasing and anticipated to do more. So we saw a COVID housing boom, for example. A lot of that housing and a lot of what was built did not necessarily take risk into account, especially future climate risk. This is the case for most of the building stock across the country, and that puts people and property at risk. So thinking in terms from a science, technology, and an innovation perspective, what can we do to retrofit that existing stock, and how can we protect that existing stock while looking forward to the future stock of the built environment? How do we do that differently through planning and investing differently and designing differently? A lot of that is going to require good climate data, which is rife with uncertainty. And in addition, it is difficult to access for a lot of the end users who would use those information, data, and products to be able to plan and build differently. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity there from a technology and innovation perspective to join with the science community to help get some of those data products more accessible. FEMA is going to be working on this, of course, and is working in partnership with NOAA. But I do think that there are massive opportunities within the private sector to help make those data more available and to get that best available climate science data and using it for design and planning across all sectors, both to meet the resilience challenge and also to do so in a way that is carbon neutral or negative, to ensure that we're building towards the future that we need, that is both safe and is also addressing the problem and the causes of climate change. Thank you.
So Art, stay there. I got a question in the chat that relates, I think, to some remarks you just made. So I'll just add that follow-on question. So does FEMA rely on other departments like NOAA to collect climate data? And are they open to private companies selling such data to them?
I guess that is a question, whether or not FEMA is open to buying climate data. I will say that we do work with our science agencies, so of which there are many across the federal interagency, NOAA, NASA, US Geologic Survey. And so we work with these departments and agencies to be able to leverage the best available climate science data. We incorporate that information or make it available for incorporation into our tools that we use for risk analysis. And so, yes, we have partnerships. We, as I said, we We are strengthening our partnership with NOAA, for example, and we just released a report with NOAA and the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy as co-authors, looking forward to how do we leverage climate science data to get it to those end users who need it the most. And from a FEMA perspective, that has a lot to do with the types of planning and projects that we support. How can that data be used to inform them so we can have more climate resilient communities?
Great, thank you, Art. So let me turn it over to CISA. Steve, similar question to what I asked Art. What role might technology and innovation play in meeting CISA's climate resilient objectives?
Great, thank you, David. So I think where we have focused our efforts is, again, on understanding dependencies and interdependencies, consequences, who's affected, what's affected, and then looking for solutions. One of the challenges that I see, and this kind of dovetails with Art's response somewhat in the last question and from the Q&A, is that at the state, local, tribal, and territorial level, you have varying degrees of capacity for dealing with complex models, complex data sets. And so being able to provide tools that are relatively easy to use, that allow state, local, tribal, and territorial planners to be able to understand the risks to their buildings and infrastructure, and then use that information to communicate and identify solutions to climate risks, I think is critically important. There obviously are very good tools with things like ArcGIS and others, but sometimes those tools are very data centric, and it is sometimes hard unless you're a knowledgeable user to be able to translate the information and the analyses from those tools into actionable decisions. So I think to have broadly available, simplified tools that support decision making is an area that is actually ripe for innovation and development.
Thank you, Steve. Turning it to Ron. How do you see emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and machine learning playing in climate change resilience?
AI predominantly mining large volumes of data, the data requirements we have for research developed for new science, new technology trends, that sort of thing. In addition, the AI and machine learning side, we can utilize that to better understand compound events, looking at future conditions for both the long-term planning and the near and the real-time disaster response. Also, we've got the opportunity to exploit new Earth observation opportunities with AI and really enhance the environmental and compliance monitoring as well. So a handful of different type of factors, but supporting everything from advancement for future activities, monitoring what's going on currently, and being able to have the flexibility and the adaptability to support real-time events.
On follow-on, you mentioned alerting and notifications in your slide and in your comments. What are some of the considerations S&T is thinking in terms of improving search and rescue and enabling more effective technologies for survivors, given the increasing risk of natural disasters compounded with climate change?
I think a big aspect of that is, the alerting folks so that they can get out of harm's way, doing that in an environment that really empowers them, something, different than the typical evacuation type of orders we have currently. It's still very much a state and local type of responsibility, but we have tools that are advancing. I guess, an example I could throw out there would be the wildfires this year, and people just traveling, being in a vehicle driving from point A to point B and not knowing or having a very difficult time locating the data to help you navigate around some of the closure areas, some of the fire areas, some of the high hazard areas, and kind of helping to ensure safe travel.
So Kathleen, if the Cooling Solutions Challenge is the first in a series of prize competitions, what is S&T's plan, and how do they intend to solicit inputs and ideas on the future competitions, and how will we stay engaged on those funding opportunities?
So a couple of things. It is the first in a series of prize challenges on climate change. We anticipate having more in the coming year. We always work with our partners like FEMA and CISA to look at prize challenge topics. One of the things that is a little bit unique about the prize program is we're able to leverage what challenge.gov can offer to us as far as functionality, and challenge.gov is able to do crowdsourcing for topics when it comes to new prize challenges. So that also might be an avenue as well. And we also will announce all the prize challenges both on challenge.gov and DHS's prize competition page. And then you may sign up for a listserv as well to get an email directly on the prize challenges when they open. And we also do social media to make sure that people keep informed about what we're doing in prizes.
Great. So Art, I have a follow-up question, and maybe you can at least direct folks to the right resource. We had a question come in regarding how do communities use BRIC funding and get more information on the opportunities available for mitigation planning.
Oh, great. Thank you. So I'll direct everyone to FEMA.gov. We have a lot of information there. Also, information related to the BRIC program. I will say that a lot of the BRIC eligible activities, which do include planning, but a lot of those activities are related to the built environment and include all of the activities that are available under the hazard mitigation assistance suite of programs, which includes flood mitigation assistance and hazard mitigation grant program and BRIC as well. And so lots of different types of projects that can be, that communities that apply and states that apply can do, including elevations, relocations, buyouts. Additionally, as I said, green infrastructure measures can be leveraged. So those are, instead of the gray infrastructure like steel and concrete, you can use green infrastructure, which uses materials like plants and soil to help build climate resilience. But again, FEMA.gov, there is a wealth of information there related both to BRIC and also to hazard mitigation planning, which can support BRIC projects to help think through some of the basics about where you may site a project or what types of projects you may need as you assess your threats and hazards in a particular area.
Thank you, Art. So CISA, maybe Sue or Steve, we had a question come in. You mentioned proposals and you were interested in novel ideas. How might submitters and through what channels might submitters provide proposals to CISA, and how do they find out more about funding opportunities?
Sue, did you want to take that one? I can say from the Resilient Services, well, from a Resilient Services branch perspective, we do not have any funding opportunities that we make available, although the resources that we produce, in particular the Infrastructure Resilience Planning Framework and the RRAP methodology, can actually be used to develop a basis for proposals to the BRIC program that Art mentioned, or to other programs. So there's a path, and we actually provide with the IRPF a tool to help a user identify appropriate federal and state funding resources depending on the nature of the project. But Sue, I'll let you address CISA capabilities.
Well, I would just agree with you, Steve. I think we would encourage you to watch the notices of funding opportunity for the BRIC, the preparedness programs, et cetera, as they come out this spring, because we are trying very hard and working with our close colleagues in FEMA to knit this all together so that public institutions in particular can apply for and get funding to support their resilience efforts. So thank you.
Thank you, Sue. So we've got several questions that came in on how to do business with S&T. I'm going to defer those questions to the follow-up slides because we have some closing comments on those, Kathleen, unless you would like to answer them now.
Yeah, so certainly, we do have things on our website with doing business with S&T. We will announce things like our Silicon Valley Innovation Program topics, our small business innovation research is all announced online. But if you have a question in particular that you want to talk with someone, there is an S&T innovation email box that we're dropping in the chat, as well as it would be on the next slide or two, that you can always ask questions about. And then on December 7th, we're going to be holding another webinar. It's called Zoom Out, and it is all about funding opportunities in doing business with DHS and S&T in particular. So you can join us there as well and ask your questions in person and live.
Kathleen. And I got one more for FEMA. Maybe Art, you might want to take this, or at least can direct folks. Is FEMA looking at technology on the use of data to expedite the approval process for grants?
I can say that FEMA is always, of course, interested in expediting the approval process. And we are also currently in the process of updating all of our grant program IT functions. And we're doing that across the board through the Grants Manager Modernization process, which or GMM, which you can look up online as we develop out various modules for different programs. So BRIC, for example, and the other competitive program under hazard mitigation assistance that I mentioned, the flood mitigation assistance program, both of those are now operating under a brand new module in that new system, that new IT system. And I will acknowledge, as someone who is responsible for the environmental and historic preservation system of record for FEMA, that we understand that it is not always as user-friendly as we would like, which is why we've embarked on this massive enterprise-wide project to update our IT systems to help from that perspective. So we appreciate the challenges, and we're also working on a solution as we go through program by program.
Follow-up question, because you brought up environmental and historic preservation. So could you discuss some of the unique challenges to climate change for environmental and historic preservation, and comment on any opportunity for innovation?
Well, I think there are huge issues. You could take sea level rise, for example, and from a historic preservation perspective, what do you do about, so I'm from Charleston, South Carolina, which is a city that is right at sea level, has a lot of risk. The city has been working to address its sea level rise risk. And so you look at that massive aggregation of historic properties in one place that are at risk, and you then have a set of massive challenges. So I think there's a huge issue there. Similarly, you think about environmental issues like the Endangered Species Act, for example. There could be taking sea level rise as another climate hazard. Looking at an endangered species that may reside within a critical habitat that is within that zone of sea level rise risk. And so how do you address that issue? I think there's a lot of room for innovation. There's going to be obviously environmental challenges outside of just federal responsibilities related to specific statutes like ESA or the National Historic Preservation Act, among many others. There are ecological and cultural resource values that we need to protect as well. So I think this isn't just FEMA is going to be able to solve this problem. Of course, we have tremendous responsibility to work on that and innovate within government, but I think there are also going to be a lot of different actors who need to come in and help us innovate as we think about protecting those natural and cultural values as a whole. So I think smart planning, again, I'll go back to climate data. How do we leverage that climate data to think through planning smarter, looking at what the risk is, and also working under deep uncertainty from a planning perspective. And so we have to build adaptive capacity within our communities, all the while taking into account those, as I said, environmental and cultural values as we look towards adapting.
Great. All right, so we only have a couple minutes left. So Art, what is your final takeaway for the audience today?
My final takeaway is that we live in a different world than the one we were all born into. And that will look increasingly different as we go down the line. We're making investment decisions. We're planning our communities, and we're doing all of that today. How can we do that differently? And how can we leverage the right climate science data to be able to point us in the right direction as we retrofit what we have and we build out new parts of our communities?
Great, thank you. And maybe Steve or Sue, I'll ask you to comment from a CISA perspective.
Well, I think Art hit the nail on the head with his observation that we're building and planning, kind of using what we've used historically for an understanding of the risk due to natural hazards, and we need to be able to look forward. I would just simply maybe add to that when we build infrastructure, we typically build it to last on the order of 50 years. And so with the rate of change that we're experiencing now, we need to be thinking about the climate at the end of life of those infrastructure systems that we're building, and not just thinking about the current conditions or understanding of risk. So there's a real need to be able to look forward and to plan carefully.
Great. Thank you so much. So again, thank you, panelists. It was definitely a very insightful dialogue. I think we got some great questions, and I appreciate your time and interest in joining the webinar today. Let me hand it over to Kathleen so she can close us out.
We mentioned some of these resources already, but I wanted to make sure I emphasize them. There is a webpage on DHS's climate change. The strategy that David opened with is also there as well. And then the Community Infrastructure Resilience has some R&D resources. And of course, near and dear to my heart is DHS Cooling Solutions Challenge, where you can learn all about it and apply and enter to win that challenge. And then just going back to like the BRIC conversation with FEMA, make sure you look at FEMA's website. And as always, if you have any questions at all, please email us on S&T innovation hq.dhs.gov. And we will be sure to either respond to you directly or give you some resources or help you out finding the right person to respond to your question. Just to finish up, one of the questions was about like, how do you do business with DHS and S&T? The next Insights Outreach webinar will be on December 7th, and it's called Zoom Out, and we will be discussing ways to do business with us, navigating DHS, and funding opportunities. On that webinar will be a lot of experts who handle everyday innovation tools like prize competition and the Silicon Valley Innovation Program and our SBIR program. So please join us. It is 2 to 3 same time on December 7th. I want to take the opportunity to thank you for attending this webinar today, and certainly for your time and your thoughts. I think that we know that we make a lasting impression on climate change. So thanks to the panelists and thanks for participating.